This conference will
Okay.
now be recorded.
Welcome you all once again to Webic Criticare 2020. Till now we have discussed how to resuscitate critically ill patient with the fluids, and we also discussed about the right heart failure as well as left heart failure, and also we have discussed about how to manage the patient with the help of cardiac output monitoring also. And while resuscitating fluids, we know which is better, static variables or dynamic variables. But today is the most important topic, resuscitation fluid, which fluid to be selected. So we have expertise here to discuss about this topic. We have Dr. Anil Kumar MR. Sir is a consultant anesthesiologist, associate professor, member secretary CPR committee, JSS Institute, Mysore. Sir has having many awards as well as honors, and also membership in many societies, as well as a lot of leadership activities sir is having. The sir is also having key skills in mainly airways, labor analgesia, ultrasound imaging skills, many more. Thank you, sir, for being here. And I also have one more expert is here to moderate this session. Dr. Shashikala Madam. Dr. Shashikala DK Madam, Professor, Department of Anesthesiology, Mysore Medical College and Research Institute, Mysuru. Thank you, Madam. Thank you for your valuable time for both of you. And I will request Dr. Shashikala Madam to take over the session, Madam. Thank you. Shashikala Madam.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. We all know we were fluid started as intravenously in 1832. From then till recently, so it was liberally we are using in and out in all patients without any hesitations. And after the so many studies and trials, so we came to know colloids are not so good for the critically ill patient, and crystalloids are the best fluids for the critically ill patients. So after that, so because of in this evidence-based era, we came to know all the fluids are not good for all the critically ill patients. It has to be individualized depending on the condition of the patient. So all fluids like normal, saline or balanced. Now, after with so many evidence, it is come to the conclusion that the balanced fluid is best for critically ill. So now Dr. Anil Kumar will elaborate on this session. So over to you, sir.
Thank you, madam. Good afternoon, all. I bring greetings from our JSS Academy of Higher Education and Research, Mysore. It gives me an immense pleasure to be a part of Webic Criticare 2020, organized by Impact, Mahan and ISCCM Mysore, under the leadership of Dr. K. Raghunath, the course coordinator, and I thank him for having me here. The intravenous fluid administration is a fundamental therapy, and that is a topic given, that is the resuscitation fluids in critical care. In this lecture, we try to answer some of the basic questions in the fluid management. That is, what is an optimal fluid in critical care, and what is its dose and how to administer this dose. We try to answer these three basic questions with an available evidences. To understand that, let us understand the basic physiology of distribution of body fluid compartment related to the body weight. 60% of the body weight in human tissues is made by the water. Out of the 60%, the 40% of the fluid is segregated in intracellular fluid. Remaining 20% is divided as 25% in a circulating blood volume, that is the intravascular fluid, and the other 75% of this extracellular fluid is present as interstitial fluid. So we have got three different fluid compartments in the body. If you take that, convert this intravascular fluid depending upon the weight of the patient, in a neonate it amounts to about 85 mL per kg. This I am talking only about intravascular fluid. And as the age increases, the amount of fluid, the water in the body reduces, and in adult it is about 65 mL per kg body weight. Coming to the history, brief history, as already made a mention, in 1832, the Robert Levins, he described the effect of the alkaline salt solution in treating patients during cholera pandemic. This was an era of starting of the utilization of the intravenous fluids for the treatment purpose. Then Sidney Ringer in 1885, he prepares a physiological salt solution for treating dehydration of children with gastroenteritis. Alexis Frank Hartmann, he modifies this Ringer's solution by adding sodium lactate in an idea of combating acidosis. During the period of the First World War, around 1941, the technique of blood fractionation comes, which causes or which helps in introduction of the first colloid, that is an albumin, into the market, and it was extensively used during a period of First World War. Why resuscitation fluids? The main purpose of using resuscitation fluids is to restore the intravascular volume, thereby enhancing the cardiac output. The second is to enhance the microcirculation, that is to maintain the tissue oxygenation and to maintain the biochemical homeostasis. This is the purpose of administration of the resuscitation fluids. Let us remember the Starling principle, what we memorized in our medical school. The Starling's model of semi-permeable capillaries, which is subject to two pressures, there is an hydrostatic pressure and an oncotic pressure gradients. The difference between these two pressure gradients determines whether the filtration occurs in a capillaries or a resorption occurs in a capillaries. Let us see in this picture, this is an arterial end of capillaries, whereas this is a venous end of the capillaries. Here, the fluid exits the capillary since the capillary hydrostatic pressure, which is exerted by the blood column, is about 35 millimeter of mercury, which is greater than the blood oncotic pressure, which is about 25 millimeter of mercury. So the net pressure is plus 10 millimeter of mercury, which forces the fluid from an intravascular compartment to the interstitial compartment. That is, the fluid is moving out of the capillaries. When you come to the venous end, what exactly is happening is there is a drop in the hydrostatic pressures, whereas the applied osmotic pressure is remaining same. So the net pressure becomes about minus 7 millimeter of mercury. So it pulls the fluid from an interstitial tissue. This is what we learned as a part of this the Starling's equation during our medical schools. That was an era when there was electronic microscope was absent. With the introduction of this electronic microscope, now what we understand is a concept of the glycocalyx. So now we know that it is not the interstitial oncotic pressure which was causing for the fluid resorption or the permeability. Now it is a specialized structure called as glycocalyx, and the endothelial basement membrane and the interstitium tissue. These are responsible for the permeability, the intravascular volume, as well as the interstitial fluid resorption. So now we need to alter our concept that this glycocalyx plays a major role in maintaining the intravascular volume rather than the interstitial colloid oncotic pressure. Now this is an electronic microscopic picture of this matrix, the glycocalyx matrix. See, this is an vascular endothelium and the RBC, the blood is flowing inside that. If you zoom it, so this is a structure of the healthy glycocalyx inside the capillaries, where which maintains the equilibrium between the pressure inside, that is intraluminal, as well as across the wall. If there is any destruction of this glycocalyx, either because of an inflammation or injury, so what happens? The capillaries becomes leaky. So this exactly what happens in a sepsis or critically ill patients, and this leads to all the problems of the leaky capillaries and hence the extravasation of the fluid. Now, what is an ideal resuscitation fluid? Ideal resuscitation fluid is something which should have a predictable and sustained increase in intravascular volume. One, it should have a composition which is as close as possible to that of extracellular fluid. It should be metabolized and completely excreted without getting accumulated in the tissues. It should not produce any adverse metabolic or systemic effects, and it should be cost effective. Is there any fluid like that in practice now? There is no such thing as an ideal resuscitation fluid till now. Then which fluids you should give to the patient, whether it is a colloid or crystalloid? Now, let us read this statement. The recent evidence suggests, however, that the volume sparing effect of colloid compared to the crystalloid is less than anticipated for critically ill adults. This emphasizes the presence of leaky capillaries, unlike in a normal adult where the volume sparing effect is pronounced with the use of colloids. With the consecutive slides, you will exactly understand what it means. What are colloids and crystalloids? The salient differences between colloids and crystalloids is the colloids are high molecular weight substances within a carrier solution. Most of the time it is a normal, the sodium chloride, which is a carrier solution, which does not carry the healthy semi-permeable membrane. Whereas the crystalloids are aqueous solutions of low molecular weight ions with or without glucose, which are easily permeable across the membrane. The colloids are known as intravascular space expanders, having a half-time of about 2 to 8 hours to days. The colloids, these are extravascular space. Mind you that the colloids are intravascular space expanders, whereas crystalloids are extravascular space expanders with a half-time of maybe about 20 to 30 minutes. Colloids maintains the plasma colloid oncotic pressure, so hence they have got a volume sparing effect. The crystalloid reduces the plasma oncotic pressure. A special complication that has been observed with the colloid are the increased mortality in a traumatic brain injury, as well as increased requirement of renal replacement therapies, and the anaphylaxis. The risk of anaphylaxis is more with the colloid. The crystalloid pose a special problem of metabolic acidosis, the acute kidney injuries, and risk of interstitial edema. In terms of hemodynamic effects, the colloid and crystalloid, whatever you use, it does not have any advantage over each other. The cost and availability is a limiting factor with the usage of colloid, whereas crystalloids are cheap, inexpensive, and it can be widely used. One more very important concept we need to change in our practice is a classical teaching what we learned is crystalloid, it requires 3 times the volume needed for replacements, the crystalloids. Let us in the subsequent slide will understand, is it same or is it has changed. Now what are the resuscitative fluids available? The resuscitation fluids can be classified as crystalloids. Under crystalloids, it may be a normal saline and balanced salt solutions. Under colloids, the naturally occurring colloids like albumin, fresh frozen plasma, sometimes the whole blood itself. The semi-synthetic one are hydroxyethyl starch, dextran, and gelatin. We restrict our discussion only to the albumin and hydroxyethyl starch here, and blood and FFP we are not going to discuss. Now a small comment on a dextrose containing fluids. The dextrose containing fluids are hypotonic fluid which contains only the dextrose and the water. The dextrose, you all know, it is a D-isomer of glucose which is rapidly taken up by the cells which undergoes metabolism, remaining only a free water in the intravascular volume, which also gets rapidly equilibrated with the different body compartments. So only about 7% stays in the intravascular system, meaning these are not a good fluid to be used as for resuscitation. Hence, the dextrose has no role in fluid resuscitation of a patient, but definitely has got a role only in fluid maintenance regimes. One more problem with the dextrose containing fluids, it can also dilute the plasma electrolyte concentration. So we are also not discussing the dextrose containing fluids. Now coming to the normal saline. The normal saline is the most commonly and a widely used crystalloid in the world. The normal saline contains the sodium and chloride at a concentration of about 154 milliequivalents, which makes it isotonic as compared to extracellular fluid. One more very important question I want to answer here is, which is normal, whether it is a 0.9% or 0.6%. Ideally speaking, in the body, the 0.6% saline is normal. It is not the 0.9%. This 0.9% came because of this designation came because it was based on an erroneous calculation of the salt concentration in a blood during when it was introduced in the period of 1882. Because of this erroneous calculation, instead of 0.6, it became 0.9, and it was widely used as normal saline, which is not correct. The large volume salines also result in an hypochloremic metabolic acidosis, the sodium and water overload. The excess of chloride has been blamed for the immune and the renal dysfunction. What exactly this causes is the chloride concentration in an afferent tubular, the afferent arterioles in in a glomerulus. It causes severe vasoconstriction. Thereby, it leads to this problem of the renal tubular injury and the acidosis. So one more problem with this is, because of this acidosis, the myocardial depression occurs. One, as an intensivist, we must also know this hyperchloremic metabolic acidosis poses a difficult scenario where the inotropic effects are also less with this development of acidosis. So inotropics may not work when you give a more fluid saline, the normal saline, and there is already an hyperchloremic metabolic acidosis. The inotropic support may not work. It also can lead to dysarrhythmias because of the potassium efflux. These are some of the salient features we need to remember whenever you coming to the large of saline in critical care. To the hypertonic saline. I already discussed one of the problems of these using normal about this sodium and water overload from the isotonic crystalloid resuscitation, which generated and greatest interest in using these small volumes of hypertonic saline solution for resuscitation. Hartmann solution. I want to explain important misconceptions what we have got as a practitioners about this hypertonic, the Hartmann solution. A common misconception is that the Hartmann solution cannot be used for a patient in acidosis. This is a common misconception. Why? Why they think so is because of the presence of lactate. However, it is important to remember and understand that to make a distinction between a lactic acid is an acid where lactate is a conjugate base. Please understand this concept one. In patients with lactic acidosis, the lactic acid dissociates into lactate and H+ ions, making the serum lactate level useful index in order to assess the severity of acidosis. One. You should also understand that each lactate anion implies the production of H+ ion. So they go hand in hand. The Hartmann solution, it does not cause the presence of a lactate in the Hartmann solution. In the liver, it gets metabolized into bicarbonate ion. Thus, it acts as an alkalinizing agent rather than an acidotic agent. Please remember. Indeed, it can aid in reducing the risk of acidosis with the administration of large volumes of Hartmann, the Ringer lactate in the patients. However, the presence of lactate ion can also interfere with the usefulness of a serial lactate measurement, what we do as a marker for measurement of lactic acidosis. So therefore, it should be guarded. It should be used guardedly whenever you are using oral solution in this critical ill patients. These are some of the take-home messages when using the ringer lactate solutions. Some of the other important aspect is, unlike the earlier thought, definitely these solutions are safe in hyperkalemia. The risk of people hesitate to use the ringer lactate in hyperkalemia because of the presence of potassium, but the rise of potassium due to oral, in particular in a CKD patient, much less than what it can cause with an metabolic acidosis. Remember, a very important message. Therefore, diabetic ketoacidosis, if you see the literature even in an Harrison and the critical care books, now to treat a DKA, either it is RL or MS, RL or MS. So RL can be safely used even in a patient with diabetic ketoacidosis, patient with the end-stage renal disease. It is not going to cause a life-threatening hyperkalemias. Now, what is balanced salt solution or physiological solutions? By definition, the balanced salt solution are crystalloids with a chemical composition that approximates with the ECF. These are the derivatives of original Hartmann's or ringer lactate solutions. The balanced salt solutions are relatively hypotonic because they have a lower sodium concentration than the extracellular fluid. Because of the instability of a bicarbonate in a plastic containers, the imbalanced salt solution, they substitute for a bicarbonate, they substitute acetate, lactate or gluconate. They substitute which also acts as a buffers, which undergo metabolism in the liver to produce a bicarbonate. And gluconate, usually there is a concept with gluconate. What we need to understand is it doesn't undergo any metabolism. It's excreted as it is in the urine. So it doesn't have a much role, and I don't know why the gluconate is added into the plasmalate or the balanced salt solution. The excessive administration of balanced salt solutions may result in hyperlactatemia. It can also cause metabolic acidosis or hypotonicity, particularly with the compounded sodium lactate. It can also cause cardiotoxicity with an acetate. The addition of calcium, when you administer a RBC, the RBC with containing a citrate as the preservative, it can also lead to formation of microthrombi. These are about a general glimpse or the basic concept we need to understand about these solutions. Coming to the colloids, the albumin, which is a naturally synthesized, which undergoes a natural synthesis in the liver, which provides about 75% of the plasma oncotic pressure. It is produced by production of by the fractionation of a blood and heat treated to prevent the transmission of infection. It is very expensive. It is more appropriate to use these albumin in a patient with cirrhotic and a liver transplantation case rather than routine administration. And we will go through what is the basis for this. And it has got a beneficial effect in a sepsis, but a potential harmful effect in a patients with a traumatic brain injury. These concepts mainly comes with a study known as the SAFE study. The albumin has the proposed hemodynamic advantage over crystalloid solutions as a volume expanding resuscitation fluid. The physiological studies have suggested that 1:3 ratio, that's what we used to practice. For every 1 ml of blood loss, a 3 of crystalloid or 1 ml of albumin or the colloid we used to replace. In actual use, what exactly happens is, which comes from the SAFE study, enrolling about 7,000 ICU patients. The observed ratio was only 1:1.4 rather than 1:3. So albumin replacement required compared to crystalloid was about 1 part of albumin, 1.4 part of crystalloid was required. And patient in the albumin arm did not have any measurable advantage in hemodynamics compared to crystalloids. The colloid and crystalloid arms have had identical rates of death and new organ failure. So albumin didn't show any advantage over crystalloid. The sub-analysis of SAFE, this study showed an increased rate of death after 2 years of patient with traumatic brain injury, a reduction of 28 days mortality in a patient with a severe sepsis. This is a basis for advocating the albumin as a potential harmful in brain injury as well as beneficial effect in sepsis. Now coming to the semisynthetic colloids. The expensiveness and non-availability of these colloids lead to the excessive use of these semisynthetic colloid, which contains the hydrolyzed bovine collagen as a gelatin, or a glucose polymer like a dextran, or a maize-derived D-glucose polymer amylopectin like hydroxyethyl starch. The hydroxyethyl starch is the only semi-synthetic colloid that have been evaluated extensively in a multiple large randomized control trials. So we restrict our discussion only to HES. We are not going to discuss about dextran and gelatin. The HES is used as a part of extensively used as a part of goal-directed therapy perioperatively as well as in ICU. The maximum dose advised is about 30 to 50 ml per kg per day. A few glimpses of this dextran is that dextran is a water-soluble glucose polymer formed by a bacterial action of sucrose through enzyme sucrase. The large dextran molecules can block the renal tubules. That's why it was taken out from the market. But the advantage of these dextrans, you might have heard that using in skin grafting and some of the plastic surgeries, because it reduces the blood viscosity, the platelet aggregation, the platelet viscosity, hence it used to improve the microcirculation. But anyhow, they have got the highest risk of anaphylaxis. Coming to the gelatin, it is produced by the hydrolysis of polypeptide, that is collagen. The half-life about 4 to 6 hours. The gelatin, the most common gelatin we have used is the Hemacil, that is a urea-linked gelatin. The other gelatin, that is the Gelofuscin, which is a suction-related gelatin. It is not popular because of an extensive hypersensitivity that was observed in a patient. Coming to the HES solution is widely used in a patients undergoing anesthesia and major surgery, particularly as a component of goal-directed fluid strategies, as well as a first-line resuscitation fluid even in operation theaters and in an ICUs. Particularly, the high molecular weight preparations are associated with then alteration in a coagulation. HA solutions of a molecular weight more than 200 kilodaltons, they pose a risk of acute kidney injury and increased chances of renal replacement therapy and death, and when it was used in particularly in sepsis patient. Let us memorize the distribution of normal electrolytes in a body fluid. That is the sodium, the extracellular fluid. The normal sodium is about 135 to 145 milliequivalents per liter. The potassium, it is about 3.5. It may vary here and there, plus or minus 1, depending on the different lab standards. And the potassium is about 3.5 to 5. The calcium around 5. The chloride, it may vary from 96 to 106 milliequivalents per liter. The bicarbonate is about 23 to 28 milliequivalents per liter. And the osmolality may vary from 275 to 300 milliosmoles per liter. Keeping this as standard, let us see what are the contents, what inside this resuscitation fluid. Sodium chloride, very clear, it has got only sodium and chloride, that is 154 milliequivalents or the millimoles per liter. So tonicity becomes 308. Very cheap, it is about 15 rupees 30 rupees per liter. Coming to the lactate ringers, the sodium content is 130. It is closer to the normal, but definitely less than a normal saline. The chloride content is 109, maybe very close to the normal ECF. The potassium is 4 and calcium is 1.5. The lactate, instead of chloride, which is replaced by the lactate, as 28 milliequivalents, and the tonicity is about 280. It is almost a normal tonicity of that of the plasma. And sometimes we may get confused. Is the lactate ringer solution is same as that of the ringer lactate? Yes, almost this can be used unanimously, as interchangeably it can be used. But only difference I will show in the next slide. What is the exact difference between RL and the lactated ringers? Coming to the balanced salt solution, widely used the Plasma-Lite. There one more brand is from Fresenius Kabi as Kabi-Lite. The contents are same. You compare the RL and the Plasma-Lite. The contents of the solution is exactly same or near close to that of the plasma, and that's why it is called as Plasma-Lite. The plasma minus protein is Plasma-Lite. The sodium is about 140, chloride 98, the potassium 5. It does not have any calcium. Magnesium is 3. This is one more addition compared to any other fluid. And acetate 27. They've also compensated chloride by adding gluconate of 23. And I said the tonicity is almost similar, but only thing is the cost factor. It is about 150 to 200 rupees, whereas saline is around 15 to 30 rupees. Lactate ringers lactate solution is about 50 rupees, 50. Coming to the albumin usually they will have a saline as a carrier solution, that is the normal sodium chloride, and the tonicity is about 250. Most of the time these are hypoosmolar. Coming to the ringer lactate, see the difference between ringer lactate and the lactated ringers. 131, this is the difference between sodium, this is the difference between a chloride, the calcium, potassium, and the acetate. Now, what are the evidences for so far I have spoken? This was the first randomized control trial which opened the eye of most of the Europeans which were using these albumin very extensively in an ICU as well as in a perioperative period. This is a human albumin administration in critically ill patient, a systemic review of randomized control trial. The objective of this study was to quantify the effect on mortality of administering human albumin or the plasma protein fraction during management of critically ill patient. They have reviewed about 30 randomized control trials, which included 1419 randomized patient. The conclusion was there is no evidence that albumin administration reduces mortality in critically ill patients with hypovolemia, burns, or hypoalbuminemia. And a strong suggestion it gave was that it may increase mortality. Be careful. This alerted the most of the Europeans of using this albumin extensively. Then comes a SAFE study. SAFE study is nothing but the saline versus albumin fluid evaluation study. It is a comparison of albumin and saline for fluid resuscitation in an ICU. It is a multicentric randomized control trial, double-blind study which compares the effect of fluid resuscitation with albumin or saline. So colloid and crystalloid. The basic colloid and the crystalloid, that is albumin saline in an ICU. It included about 6,997 patients who underwent randomization into two groups. The conclusion of the study, the primary objective conclusion of the study was in patients in ICU, use of either 4% albumin. In India, I mind you, it is available as 5% and 20%. In Europe, it is available as 4%. 4% albumin or normal saline for fluid resuscitation resulted in a similar outcomes at 28 days. That means to say they came to a conclusion there is no much difference whether you use a colloid or the crystalloid, but the sub-analysis of the SAFE study gives an insight into whatever I spoke in the previous couple of slides. That is, the resuscitation with albumin was associated with significant increase in the rate of death at 2 years among patients with traumatic brain injury. This is mainly because within 1 week of administration, they observed a rapid rise or an abnormally raised in ICT in these patients. The second observation was decrease in the adjusted risk of death of 28 days in patient with severe sepsis. This is the reason why the albumin has got a role in treating the sepsis. The third point, no significant difference in hemodynamic endpoint were observed. A ratio of volumes of albumin to the volume of saline administered to achieve an endpoint was observed to be 1:1.4. This was, I was stressing in the previous slide, that what we used to think it is for every 1 part of albumin, 3 part of crystalloid. See the difference is there. For every 1 part, it is just 1.4 of crystalloid, which was required to achieve the hemodynamic endpoint. I think this should then carry message. Now coming to one more study, that is in 2011, a New England Journal of Medicine published a mortality after fluid bolus in African children with severe infection. This is known as a FEAST trial, that is fluid expansion as a supportive therapy in a resource limiting setting particularly. These studies are done in Africa. So comparing the use of boluses of albumin or saline with no boluses. The difference between previous study and this study is here they are comparing the bolus and no bolus between a crystal and colloid. And the conclusion was in acute illness, it appeared that the hemodynamic effect and effects on patient-centered outcomes of albumin are largely equivalent to that of saline. So they didn't observe any great changes in administration of colloid or the crystalloid. Now, this is a study where the intensive insulin therapy and the pentastarch resuscitation in severe sepsis. Actually, this study compared HES with that of a ringer lactate solution. It is a randomized control trial involving about 800 patients with the severe sepsis in an ICU. A Scandinavian investigator reported that use of 6% hydroxyethyl starch, that is 130 kilodaltons, the molecular weight, as compared with ringer lactate, was associated with a significant increase in the rate of death at 90 days. and a significant 35% relative increase in the rate of renal replacement therapy, these results were consistent with the previous trial of 10%. That means it is trying to tell that hydroxyethyl starch has got some problems with the renal replacement or the renal dysfunction. Then the CHEST trial. CHEST trial is crystalloid versus hydroxyethyl starch trial. This is one of the large trial involving about 7,000 adults in ICU. It's a blinded randomized control trial called the crystalloid versus hydroxyethyl starch trial involving 7,000 adult patients in an ICU. The conclusion was both these previous studies, there's a Scandinavian study and the CHEST, showed no significant difference in short-term hemodynamic resuscitation endpoints apart from transient improvement and lower pressure requirement with HES in a chest. The observed ratio of HES to crystalloid in this trial was approximately 1:1.3. So 2 points to be noted is with the albumin it is almost same 1.4 and with the hydroxyethyl starch 1.3. This from analysis of surgery where major complications, mortality and resource utilization after open abdominal surgery, comparison between the saline and the plasma-light. This is between a saline and plasma-light where they have studied a 0.9% saline in about 714 patients who received only a calcium-free balanced salt solution. There is a plasma-light for a replacement fluid losses during the surgery. The use of balanced salt solution was associated with a significant decrease in the rate of major complications, including a lower incidence of post-operative infection, the renal replacement therapy, the blood transfusion, and the acidosis. So, to look here, it appears that the plasma-light or the balanced salt solutions have got an upper hand over the normal saline. One more publication from JAMA in 2012 said the association between a chloride liberal versus chloride restrictive intravenous fluid administration strategy in kidney injury. Particularly, they want to study what is its effect on a patient who is already having a kidney injury in a critically ill ICUs. This is a single center sequential observation in ICU study, the use of the chloride restrictive fluid strategy using a lactated ringers and a calcium-free balanced solution. This versus the albumin and NS. So they observed and associated with a significant decrease in the incidence of acute kidney injury and the renal replacement therapy when they use a balanced salt solution rather a sodium chloride, that is the sodium chloride containing solutions. So once again telling the chloride is a culprit in causing these renal problems. This particular publication from BJA in 2018, a couple of years back, the normal saline versus a balanced crystalloid for a goal-directed perioperative fluid therapy in a major abdominal surgery, a randomized double-blind study, which compared a sodium chloride 0.9% with a acetate buffered crystalloid. The conclusion was, compared with the patient receiving a balanced crystalloid, normal saline in patients undergoing a major abdominal surgery was associated with an increased need of vasopressor support. This once again a recent 2018, the balanced crystalloid versus saline in critically adult. This is one of the largest ever studied. That is known as the SMART trial. That is isotonic solution and major adverse renal event trial. The SMART is isotonic solution and major adverse renal event trial, which included about 15,000 adults, where they compared saline versus ringer lactate or the plasma-light. In conclusion, from this particular article is, in this trial involving critically ill adults, IV administration of balanced crystalloid rather than a saline had a favorable effect on the composite outcome of death, new renal replacement, and a persistent renal dysfunction. Emphasizing more on the balanced salt solutions are better than either a colloid or a normal saline. This is salted trial, that is saline against lactated ringers or plasma-light in an emergency department. So far we looked into a perioperative situation or in an ICU situation. This is in non-ICU situation. This is mainly in an emergency department. This is also one of the largest trial including about 13,347 patients. The conclusion was, among non-critically ill adults treated with intravenous fluid in an emergency department, there was no difference in hospital free days between a treatment with balanced crystalloid and that of saline. Now, with all this, so we come to a conclusion, that the balanced salt solutions are better than a normal saline, and which is also better than a colloid. Now, how much fluid to give? It is a very traditional way of doing the treatment was the systolic hypotension and particularly oliguria. They were widely used as a trigger to administer a fluid challenge ranging from 200 to 1000 ml of crystalloid colloid for an adult patient. But conclusive evidence and conclusive guidelines was given by this the goal-directed sepsis guidelines, where the Surviving Sepsis Campaign bundle of 2018, which says international guidelines for sepsis management recommend that the patient with sepsis should receive a rapid infusion of 30 ml per kg of crystalloid solution in the first 3 hours, 30 ml per kg in first 3 hours after presentation, with an ongoing fluid administration for patients who continue to exhibit a hemodynamic response. I just want to read this particular Surviving Sepsis Campaign guidelines. The guidelines recommend this particular fluid, that is 30 ml in 3 hours. This should comprise a minimum of 30 ml per kg of intravenous crystalloid fluid, although little literature includes the control data supporting this volume. The recent intervention studies have also described this as a usual practice in the early stages of resuscitation, and observational evidence is supportive. The absence of any clear benefit following the administration of a colloid compared with the crystalloid solution in the combined subgroup of sepsis, in conjunction with the expense of albumin, supports a strong recommendation for the use of crystalloid solution in the initial resuscitation of a patient with sepsis and septic shock. Because some evidence indicates that a sustained positive fluid balance during ICU stay is harmful, fluid administration beyond this initial resuscitation should require a careful assessment of a likelihood that the patient may remain fluid responsive. I think this should be a take-home message from my lecture. And these are some of the other evidences to show that which is better, whether fluid bolus is better or an infusion is better. The recent trial of fluid resuscitation in a resource-limiting setting, already I discussed the trials, however, suggests that potential negative effects from fluid bolus administration as a part of sepsis resuscitation. But these all studies in a resource-poor setting. One more is the randomized trial comprising a bolus of 5% albumin, a bolus of saline, had no fluid bolus among more than 3,000 children with a severe febrile illness and impaired perfusion in Africa, found that fluid boluses significantly increased 48 hours mortality. One more trial of among 212 patients in Zambia with a sepsis-induced hypotension without respiratory failure found that administration of an average of about 3.5 liters of fluid in 6 hours after presentation increased to 20-day mortality compared with that of administration of average of 2 liters. So I want to conclude from this is a limiting fluid resuscitation and a permissive hypotension appears to increase the survival in other causes of shock such as traumatic and non-traumatic hemorrhagic shock. Then fluid responsiveness. Already Dr. Raghunathan has given an introduction about this. A primary goal of fluid resuscitation is to increase the cardiac output and improve oxygen perfusion. Only about half of the hemodynamically unstable patients, however, experience an improvement in a stroke volume with the fluid administration. Thus, research and clinicians are increasingly interested to predict which patient will experience an hemodynamic improvement after fluid administration, that is fluid responders. We want to identify who are the fluid responders. The early static measures such as the central venous pressure and a mixed venous oxygen saturation, they poorly predict such a responsiveness, and therefore they are no longer recommended for a routine use. However, the patient variables like heart failure, hyponatremia, and immunosuppression, hypothermia and immunosuppression has to be taken into consideration during fluid responsiveness. Then one more important is the most recent research, however, has focused on dynamic variables that quantify the changes in a hemodynamic measurement or a vascular structures following a interventions to change the ventricular preload, such as a passive leg raise, the variable plethysmography index, the pulse pressure variations, the stroke volume variation, then the IVC changes with response to fluid, and the changes to transesophageal echocardiogram. So these measures have to be taken into consideration to assess the fluid responsiveness rather than a static. So after this, just to completion, what are the problems with resuscitation? It is an interstitial edema and the risk of organ dysfunction. So to conclude, which fluid? For most critically ill adults, the crystalloid remain the first line for a fluid resuscitation. I am not going to differentiate in burns which is best and which is best. In general, in ICU, this is best. The balanced crystalloid may decrease the risk of death, renal replacement, RRT requirement, and persistent renal dysfunction compared with saline. So I try to differentiate between saline and balanced salt. Then between the colloid and the crystalloids, semi-synthetic colloid may increase the risk of AKI or death compared with crystalloid solutions. Now coming to the response, whether using a measures of fluid responsiveness to guide fluid administration improves the clinical, whether it improves the clinical outcomes for critically ill adults requires further research. I cannot tell conclusively which is the test rather than I can test a series of tests for that. Then how much? A reasonable approach, only this comes from a sepsis, not in any other thing. A reasonable approach to fluid resuscitation for most acutely ill patients is to use a primary balanced crystalloid giving about 2 to 3 liters for initial, and dosing further fluid should be based on a measures of anticipated hemodynamic response. So that concludes my portion. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I think Shashikala madam. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much, sir, for an elaborative, complete session. I think he included everything. What and all, so many trials have covered. He included in a one session. It was a nice. So we are moving from flooding the patients with the fluids to like using the fluids like drug. So no longer bolus. Normal saline, normal is misnomer, and everything is based on the glycocalyx breach. So it was a very wonderful session. So now the session is open for discussion. If anyone interested, they can ask queries.
We have seniors here, madam. Dr. Nelly. Hello.
Hey, sir.
Dr. Nelly ma'am is there. Nelly ma'am. Hello.
Hello, sir.
Hello, Nalini madam. Are you there, madam? Nalini madam. Okay. There is question from Dr. Dinesh. Dr. Dinesh, she want to ask: is hydroxyethyl starch associated with increased risk of bleeding? Dr. Anil Kumar sir. Hydroxyethyl starch associated with increased bleeding risk.
As such, there is no strong evidence to say whether it is having a increased risk of bleeding, but sometimes it has interfered with the calculation of this bleeding time and coagulation profile. It has got some evidence of interfering with these tests rather than causing an actual bleeding.
Okay. Sir also want to discuss long-term complication of hydroxyethyl starch.
Hydroxyethyl starch long-term complication is mainly, so far identified causes are mainly on renal tubular tissues. Renal tubular tissues and leading to renal dysfunction and even failures.
Okay. What is the present recommendation for using FFP for fluid replacement? Dr. Dinesh sir want to ask. FFP for fluid replacement.
Yes, it has definitely got a role. Actually, it depends upon the clinical setting and the coagulation profile, where the adding of these proteins, particularly the coagulation factors, is going to help the patient. That should be taken into consideration. But it has got a definite role in treating the situation of coagulopathy while taking care of resuscitation of the patient also. If there is a massive blood loss and patient is having coagulation abnormalities, definitely the FFP has got a role as a resuscitation fluid.
Dr.
Raghunath?
Nalini, ma'am, yes, Lakshmikant, please.
Yeah, Dr. Arun, Anil, I just wanted to ask how significant is the mortality when you use colloids in head injury patient?
Colloids. What they're saying is, with the initial 1 week, this particular observation began with the SAFE trial, where they observed the about maybe 37%. Exactly, I cannot quote what is the percentage, but compared with crystalloid, about 27 to 30% of the patient, there is an increased incidence of ICT, which has led to the mortality of these patients.
You mean it's a quite significant mortality, or
compared to balance salt solutions?
okay, because the SAFE study has involved just a very small percentage of head injury brain trauma patients per se, and the same study also quotes they need further workup or evaluation with respect to head injury patients. Yeah.
No, that was a stimulus for an initial study. Sorry, that was the initiation to say that the colloids have got an effect on ICT. But there are no much studies, but there are other couple of studies which has said the whatever the values I said, the 27% to 30%. It is not the SAFE study which has told that 27 to 30% mortality is not with the SAFE study, but other of couples. But there also they say it requires further research and further better randomized RCT trials to conclusively say that colloids are contraindicated.
Yeah, that's true. It's still probably a small controversy is there with a mild inclination of mortality towards colloids. Yeah, they say they may increase mortality rather than they will or they increase mortality. And maybe we might get more evidence in coming times. Thank you.
Dr. Gurudat sir is also there. Sir, you want to add any points here, sir? Dr. Gurudat sir?
Gurudat sir is guided me through this whole my preparation.
And Nalini madam also there. Now I am not able to see madam actually. Okay. Hello, Gurudat sir. Okay.
I think Ravi sir is there. I think Raghu.
Ravi sir. Okay. Hello, Ravi sir.
Hello.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. Yeah. It's a good talk. In fact, there is a lot of discussion about the use of sodium chloride in patients of diabetic ketoacidosis and diabetes. As you said rightly, the chloride solution is absorbed in the proximal.
ಮಾತಾಡಬೇಕು ಯಾಕೆ ಬೇಕಾಗ್ತದೆ ನಾಯಿಗೆ ಹೊರಗಡೆ
Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes, sir. Somebody is talking actually. Sir, you told about ringer lactate versus problem with the, sir, in sepsis. Can you elaborate on that part, ringer lactate?
Dr. Ravi, you are asking me or Dr. Ravi?
Yes, Anil sir, to you, sir.
What I wanted to highlight on a ringer lactate is the 4 different issues. Yes. That is, the misconception always people think that it is rather than lactate, they think it is a lactic acid, and they think it should not be given in a patient with acidosis. We always think the ringer lactate or lactic acidosis there, so we should not give. It may increase the chances of acidosis. So just I wanted to remove that misnomer. It is not a lactic acid which is present. It is a lactate, which is a conjugate ion which is present in an RL. That is one. The second was the lactic acid dissociates to hydrogen ion and lactic anions, making the serum lactate as an useful measure in identifying the severity of the acidosis. And that each lactate ion produces a one H plus ion. That means as the lactate ion is increasing, that should parallel with that of H plus ion increasing in a human tissues other in a patient. That was the second point. The third point, Hartmann solution contains these lactate to generate these bicarbonate by the liver. Thereby, they act as an alkalinizing agent rather than an acidotic agent. That was the third point. Am I audible, Raghu?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You're audible.
Yeah. The fourth point, what I was stressing was the presence of lactate. Suppose if you're giving a ICU patient a much more of lactates, and you're consequently measuring the lactate levels in that patient, it may interfere with your results because you are already giving lactate and you're also checking lactate. So be careful while doing this. That was my fourth point. The fifth point was hyperkalemia. Because of the presence of potassium in RL, we always used to think, so potassium is there, we should not give in a patient who is hyperkalemic or a patient who is having some renal disorder. But in actual scenario, the rise of potassium by administration RL is not as dangerous as administering the same volume of saline and creating an hyperchloremic metabolic acidosis. That was my point. Okay. In terms of acidosis,
Thank you,
one.
sir. Dr. Shobha Rani want to ask, what about sterophundin? Cost effectiveness between sterophundin and plasmalite. Sterophundin.
Sterophundin is sterophundin.
Shobha Rani, you can come, madam. You can ask yourself. Okay, madam, madam wants to ask about sterophundin. Okay, and Ashwini madam wants, sir, actually hydroxyethyl starch is not used in ICU, as he said it's first line in ICU or
Hello?
OT. Yeah, yes, madam. Please, you can speak.
Hello?
Yes, madam, you can
Hello?
speak. Yes, madam.
Hello?
You can
It is
audible.
Listen to me? Hello?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Matadi, Shubha. You are audible,
Hello,
you
sir.
can continue.
Hello, sir. Sterophundin is also one of the balanced solution only. Instead of gluconate, it has got acetate and malate as buffer solutions, and chloride content is 127 compared to 154 in normal saline. That is 0.9% saline. So cost effectiveness between the sterophundin and plasmalite. Plasmalite is very cost, as you said, it is cost around 156 rupees. So what about sterophundin? Using sterophundin in order to avoid hyperthermic metabolic acidosis.
I don't exactly know what is the rate of that, but what I know, little information about sterophundin is it prevents dilutional acidosis. It mainly prevents the what you call, it is an isotonic
It
and
has got
plasma.
both acetate and malated buffer solutions.
Yeah. So more of it is an acid base balanced base excess rather than compared to the plasmalite, and it is since it is a lactate free, it enables to use the lactate as a marker for hypoxia. Since sterophundin is a lactate free, it enables lactate as a marker of hypoxia. That is one advantage as I think between the contents between plasmalite and sterophundin. That's the greatest advantage. I don't know about the price, how much it costs. But the greatest advantage is lactate free, so it enables the use of lactate as a marker of hypoxia.
But acetate and malate, still they are considered as precursors of both acetate and malate. Both are still considered as precursors of bicarbonate.
Precursors
So
of
they are
bicarbonate. Correct.
lactate pathway only for metabolism.
What is the chloride level you said, Shobha? Chloride level in sterophundin?
127, still lesser than normal.
Lesser than normal saline, but the preparations, what I understand is the chloride level should be as close to the plasma as possible, And these balanced salt solutions are prepared in such a way that for a chloride, they compensate by adding these lactate and acetate so that the chloride effect should be reduced. By adding this buffer like lactate and malate, they reduce the content of chloride, which is a main culprit in producing the renal tubular problems.
Raghu.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Raghu,
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Is there any role of nitric oxide in hypervolemia like this? There is a lot of talk about nitric oxide, release of nitric oxide in endothelium of the calyx. So it causes sort of vasoconstriction and remodeling of the endothelium, causing damage in hypervolemia. There is a role. Do you have any idea about that?
Anil sir, you can answer. Nitric oxide role.
Yeah, as such, I don't know, but these colloid solutions, they modulate the problem of nitric oxide, and hence, particularly in inflammation, that is in a patient with an sepsis, this is one of after introduction of the concept of glycocalyx, as sir was talking about. So they also inhibit this, the effect of nitric oxide there. So they increase the permeability. That's what the limited knowledge I got, rather than using per se the nitric oxide in treating inflammation.
That's what hypervolemia is the main cause for the injuring the endothelium, and then the exhalation of the fluid and causing more of increased pulmonary, especially in the lungs, in the low vascular resistance of the lungs. The release of nitric oxide could damage so many things. There is a lot of studies going on.
Only that knowledge I have got.
Yes.
That this is also one of the culprit in the pathophysiology of increasing the capillary permeability.
Right.
Any other questions from the audience? Okay. Shashikala madam, any message for the listeners, madam?
This is era of evidence-based, and we need to update as and when, and definitely need to change our traditional method of flooding the patient, and we should use the fluids like drugs. Thank you.
Thank you. Anil sir, final message for the listeners.
Final message. So now
Yes,
with the available evidence till today, it is a balanced crystalloid solution in most of the ICU settings. There is a choice. Whenever you want to use colloids, use carefully depending on, and it has to be tailor-made or fabricated to a particular patient. So right fluid in a right setting, in a right patient, that should be the choice. The right fluid, right setting, whether it is a perioperative or ICU or different situ, and a right choice should be our goal.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir. The very valid message both have given actually. All fluids should be used like a drugs. It is like a drugs. You have to prescribe to the nursing staff like a drugs. So much ml of fluid, so many hours, so many the way of giving. So it should be used like a drugs, and it should be used for the right patient, right time, and right dose. Right dose. That is right setting. So this is the very valid message you have given, sir. The fluids are the mainstay of management in ICU, in OT, in even most of the inpatient actually. It should not be used as a maintenance fluid. Something called maintenance fluid will be given like a 50 ml per hour, 75 ml per so many days. That should not be given. Fluid as it is life-saving, may be life-threatening also if you use larger dose. So something called, there is upcoming resuscitation is called de-resuscitation once you filled the volume adequately. That is coming up now. So we have to use fluids very effectively depending upon the patient, right time, right setting. Well said actually by Dr. Anil as well Dr. Shashikala madam. Points are taken very well, sir. Thank you so much for both of you for your valuable time. This talk was very much elaborative on fluids. So most of it was like a summary of the thing what you discussed so far last week. It was like that actually. Thank you, Anil sir, and thank you, Shashikala madam, for your valuable time. This will be your PPT will be used, sir, in the in our group as a PDF format. If with your permission, also recording will be used if the student request. Thank you so much, sir.
Pleasure.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Shashikala madam. Thank you all the
Thank you all.
seniors, Dr. Sundari madam, Dr. Gurudas sir, Dr. Ravi sir. Thank you so much, sir, for your presence. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.